Akala siguro nila yung kontrata sa Sinovac, kontrata sa Pfizer,
Hi
wala.
everyone, my name is P. Renada, Rappler's multimedia reporter covering Malacanang. And thanks for tuning in at this late hour. It's 11:55, and a few minutes ago, the palace finished airing President Rodrigo Duterte's message to the people, which is actually his remarks during an IATF meeting earlier today in Malacanang. So, this is an episode of Rappler Recap where I want to basically summarize key points that happened during the meeting. So, two things. The 1 hour long airing video basically tackled two major topics, and yung napag-usapan was number one, the vaccine procurement, and also the president's anger or outrage at certain businesses who he claims have misdeeds against the government, and he's saying that he won't ever recognize any franchise given to such a business. And reporters covering the speech believe that he was referring to ABS-CBN, but even if he didn't mention ABS-CBN specifically during those aired remarks. So I'll just quickly go through those two topics, yung vaccine procurement and the franchise remarks. So in terms of vaccine procurement, the president basically defended the government and vaccine czar Carlito Galvez Jr. from allegations that the vaccine procurement is overpriced and riddled with anomalies or marred by corruption. So, isang quote that he had during the meeting was, walang magic dyan. And he was saying that the government never touches the money used to pay the pharmaceutical firms. So he was saying that the money will actually be released by World Bank or the Asian Development Bank to the firms, and the government just needs to give a piece of paper signifying payment. So it's like he's saying that you don't need to worry about any corruption because actually no government official of the Duterte administration will even lay hands on the money to be loaned by World Bank or ADB for the vaccines. He also tells Galvez not to let the congressional investigations deter him from his work. He says to go ahead with his game plan. He also briefly extols Galvez's virtues. So he even talks about Galvez's career as a military man and calls him hero of Marawi. Then in a later part of the meeting, see Galvez himself speaks because he's one of the officials present, and he is saying that he is confident that the Philippines is getting a good deal with Sinovac, which we know is this pharmaceutical firm supplying one of the vaccines which we are trying to get here to the Philippines. And he's saying that based on his reading articles about how other governments have procured Sinovac vaccines, that the price that the Philippines is getting for them is actually not that far from the prices that other countries are getting, even if those countries made bigger orders of Sinovac vaccines. Then Galvez also says that ADB will act as a third party to ensure we are getting a good deal. So ADB kasi is a lending agency, a bank basically, an international bank that provides funding for development projects in different countries all over the world. And ADB basically, Galvez is saying, it will make sure that the Philippines is getting vaccine prices that are fair and not that far from other countries. Kasi yung ADB, meron daw itong access dun sa prices of the vaccines as procured or purchased by other countries. So obviously these countries won't really divulge right that information necessarily to all other governments, but he's saying that ADB can act as a kind of a way to ensure that the Philippines is getting a good deal. Obviously, because ADB is providing the funding for these vaccines that will come to the Philippines. And then Duque also speaks during the meeting, and both of them, Duque and Galvez, cite the importance of abiding by the Confidential Disclosure Agreement or CDA, which they signed with the pharmaceutical firms who are making the vaccines. The CDA is also known in the public as a non-disclosure agreement or NDA. And sinasabi nila na if we don't follow the NDA, if we like just talk about the prices, the volume, etc. In public, then we could actually endanger the contract or the agreement that we've entered into and potentially lose doses of vaccines that were supposed to be coming our way. So they're also saying that we could lose face. The Philippine government could lose face with these firms, and maybe in the future, hindi na these firms might not trust the Philippine government with future deals. And this is obviously very critical if we want to get more vaccines in the future, or even other agreements, other products in other emergencies, diba, in the future. So basically they were saying this because we know naman na government officials now are under fire for being not as transparent, or maybe like holding off on important information that the public wants to know, like the prices of these vaccines, how much are we getting for them, are we getting a good deal? So they're basically defending themselves that even if we want to disclose this information for transparency, we are bound by the CDA. And then the next part of the speech, or the major topic that came out during the speech, was Duterte's outrage at franchises. So ito medyo malabo kasi hindi klaro which company he's talking about. I mean, the problem with the speech was it's edited, right? So we don't hear everything he said during the meeting. We just hear what Malacanang decides to air. And the parts that Malacanang decided to air did not contain the name of the firm that the president was referring to. But what did the president say? So he was saying that he would not grant any franchise, or he would not implement any franchise to a firm if they still have unsettled accounts with the government. And then later on, he even termed this as misdeeds. So just to give you a quote, for example, itong direct quote from the president, "Mga franchise na yan, hindi ko i-implement yan hanggang they settle their full accounts with government." And then he also said later on, "For all I care, you can have 1,000 franchises. You will not see the light of day until you come to government with clean hands." So who's he talking about? My guess, and the guess of certain other reporters covering this beat, is that he's talking about ABS-CBN. Why? Because earlier today, the House of Representatives Committee held a hearing on the Lopez group of companies, and one of the topics of that probe was to see whether or not they shortchanged the government in a certain deal they had years ago. So is it a coincidence, right, that the president is ranting about a franchise hours after a committee hearing on the Lopez group of companies and on ABS-CBN specifically? So and these hearings came about because certain lawmakers, including Senate President Tito Soto himself, were saying that they filed new bills to grant a fresh franchise for ABS-CBN. So, diba, it's probably more than a coincidence. But as I said, he did not mention ABS-CBN during the entire speech. So we have asked presidential spokesman Harry Roque to confirm if the president was referring to ABS-CBN, but until now he hasn't replied about that. So those were the two major themes that we saw during this meeting, and for me it shows that the president's mind, is still preoccupied with his crackdown on perceived enemies, apart from COVID-19. And this is not new, right? In previous speeches, during pandemic task force meetings, we've heard the president rant about communists and also critical lawmakers. So hindi na yan bago. It just shows that it's a recurrent theme, right? Alongside the pandemic, he could really discuss or target people he thinks are against him, or people he thinks are his enemies, people he has a grievance against. So that's what we saw today in the meeting. Thanks for watching Rappler Recap despite the late hour. Again, this is P. Renada, and hope you can catch other episodes of Rappler Recap. Good night.